Thank you, Mr Chair.
I call Grant Robertson.
Just wanted to pick up initially raised, which is in clause 19, the protection of names. And as I stated in my earlier call, this is a section of the bill that means that nobody else is allowed to use any of the names listed in section 19. And it actually is quite clear what a protected name is, and it's all of the names listed. Now, some of them are going to carry on. The Arts Council of New Zealand Toi Aotearoa is going to carry on, and it's been protected, and that clearly, because this is a bill that repeals the previous bill, presumably there was a protection of names section. But where things go awry is where a name is protected but the board is being dissolved. And that is the case in the case of Te Waka Toi, because what the government is effectively saying is, we own the name Te Waka Toi. And it only took me a couple of minutes of Googling to discover that the phrase, the name Te Waka Toi, has actually been used by a number of different people over the years. As my colleague Lino Turakatini said, it's a poetical name, the arts waka. And in fact, it's the name of a couple of works of art. You can go and see one of them by Fred Graham in the Auckland City Art Gallery, if you like. It's the name of an exhibition that's been held previously. And yet the government wants to come to this house tonight and tell us that it controls Te Waka Toi. It controls it by dissolving it, disestablishing it, and saying no one else can have the name. Well, to me, Mr Chair, that's absolutely ridiculous. And it is unfortunately typical of this bill, because as we discussed previously, and I'll come to this in a moment, we discussed the confusing language around community arts councils in part 2, and none of us were actually clear by the end of it exactly what was happening with that. But by taking away the ability of anybody to actually use the name Te Waka Toi in the future, the government, in my view, has wholly overstepped its mandate, and that is under section 19.1. But Mr Chair, if we carry on down, we come to section 19.3. No body other than a community arts council within the meaning of this Act may be incorporated or registered, or may operate or carry on activities under any enactment or in any other manner under a name that includes the words Community Arts Council or Arts Council. So the government, in clause 19.3, is banning the use of the term Arts Council unless it's as defined under this Act, which, as we discovered during part 2, is completely meaningless and gobbledygook. But Arts Council is a term that will be applied in a lot of different ways. Once upon a time, I was the trustee of something called the New Zealand Students' Arts Council. Heke Parata, I think, may once upon a time have been involved in the New Zealand Students' Arts Council as well. Would we not have been able to call ourselves the New Zealand Students' Arts Council? Because the term Arts Council is now apparently owned by the government. It's protected by the government. You can't call yourself an Arts Council. I've just looked it up online again. We've got the North Taranaki Arts Council, the Motueka Arts Council. Are these people allowed to be arts councils anymore? Because unfortunately we were very unclear when we looked at section 16 that it seemed possible that the Arts Council could establish community arts councils in particular geographical areas. But it's not just community arts councils that the government is trying to control here. It's the term Arts Council generally, and that is what is written in clause 19.3. Nobody can in any other manner use the name Community Arts Council or Arts Council. And I'm sorry to say, Mr Chair, that this bill is once again, I think, either creating an unintended consequence or as a result of the government overreaching in what it wants to do in this area. And to me, clause 19 of this bill is now giving rise to significant concerns for me about the way in which the government intends to control the usage of terms like Te Waka Toi and like Arts Council. I simply don't believe that those people who provide art services in the community, who want to come together in different communities, band together and create a body that helps develop artists in their area, are now going to have to go through this bizarre process under section 16 of this bill to establish themselves as a community arts council, and otherwise they're up for prosecution, I presume, because they decide to call themselves an arts council. It is a farce, Mr. Speaker. This bill is the product of a minister who hasn't stood up and justified it. He's got a bill he's been sitting on for years, and now he brings it back to the House with a clause like Clause 19 that, quite frankly, I think goes miles beyond his mark. Mr Chair, I'll just briefly, Mr Chair,
Grant Robertson.
just briefly take another call here on one other matter, and that is to return to Clause 21 just briefly. And just think for a moment what this House is about to do. This House is about to vote to dissolve the Pacific Arts Committee and Te Waka Toi. I was at those awards with the Minister a few weeks ago. Jonathan Lamalu receives an award. Victor Roger, the playwright, receives an award. We had a stunning performance by a woman named Natalia Mann, who's a harpist. These are artists who have been fostered by the Pacific Arts Committee. They've been fostered by a group of people who understand not only Pacific communities but the role of the arts, understand the diversity of those Pacific communities. On that night, the representatives of each of the different Pacifica communities got up and presented awards, and we had everyone from Niue to Tuvalu, from Tokelau through to Samoa, Tonga. They all got up there, and that's the strength of that body, and that's what's being dissolved tonight under Clause 21, in the hope that two people sitting on the new Arts Council, two people, will be able to represent those communities. They won't, Mr Chair. It's unfair on them. It will put undue pressure on them, and it will not lead to the kind of Pacific arts vibrancy that we would expect in New Zealand. And Te Waka Toi, which has been responsible for encouraging all manner of Māori artists, Patricia Grace, Wiramu Ka, Kirita Kanawa, all of these people have been recipients of awards and grants from Te Waka Toi that recognise the special place of Māori arts in New Zealand, and that body is being dissolved tonight in the hope that four people appointed by the Minister of Māori Affairs don't have to be Māori. They could come along and they can somehow represent that rich diversity of Māori arts as well. Mr Chair, Part 3 of this bill is flawed. It is the part of the bill that dissolves organisations that have done a great deal for the arts in New Zealand, and I believe it's a very sad day indeed.
The Honourable Nanaia Mahuta.
Mr Chair, I want to follow on from the comments made